Hi there, I'm your host Clive Serkin, and welcome to the Unstuck podcast, where we're on a journey to help you get control of your work environment, get yourself unstuck, and perform to your full potential. So, the reality is on a podcast, all guests are equal, and I love every guest equally, and there's no favorite guest, but I'd be lying if I didn't say that today's guest is pretty special, and one that I was been hoping to get on the show since the idea of the show started. And I'm delighted to welcome Kelly Leonard. Let me talk a little bit about Kelly. And Kelly's the executive director at Second City. He'll talk about the role. I'm going to say he's an icon in Second City, which is his code language where he's really old and been around forever. If I remember correctly, because I've been tracking him, you started the year before I arrived in Chicago. So I think you started at Second City in 1988.
Yep, that's right.
It's been a while. And Kelly's pretty much done everything there is to be done at Second City. He's produced shows for a long time, worked with all the names you can think of. And, you know, Tina Fey and Stephen Colbert and Seth and name them, you've worked with them, which I think is pretty cool. But to be totally frank, I think the coolest thing about Kelly Leonard is the work he's doing outside of the main stage at Second City, particularly the work he's doing with Chicago Booth. And I'm going to try and sort of spend a lot of time talking about that, although I'm sure everybody wants to hear about all the greats of Second City and the experiences and the stories you can tell, which you'll have to go and find Kelly and buy him a beer and talk to him about that then. So a massive warm welcome to Kelly Leonard.
Clive, it's great to be here.
It's great to talk to you again. I was a guest on Kelly's podcast. So Kelly's an author of the book Yes And, which if you haven't read it, you'd be one of four people. So go, you four people who haven't read his book, go and buy it. He also is the host of a podcast, Getting to Yes And. But talk to me about the work you're doing at Booth, because that's really interesting. And most of the people who are listening to this podcast are people in business. And so as a former washed up business exec, the notion of behavioral science and behavioral economics was so fundamental to how I thought about marketing and just generally, broadly speaking, behavior between humans inside a company. So tell me about what you guys are doing.
Yeah, so when I, after Yes And came out, and this was around 2016, and we had done a bunch of press on it, and it was doing well. I was the producer at Second City at the time, which I'd done that since 1992, and so bit of a midlife crisis, and I decided to step down from that position. And my boss at the time, the owner of Second City, basically knew I was not hireable anywhere, so he made me an offer. He's like, "Why don't you stay on as a consultant for a year and find either a bridge out or a bridge back in?" And then we had the fire at Second City, and unfortunately that took out my office, and we're cramped into these tiny, little rental offices.
By the way, I remember the fire because I lived a block away.
Yeah, it smelled like smoke for a long time after that. And I lost almost everything in that fire, which ended up being in some ways a gift, as I learned when I started working with the behavioral science community. But we were, so I got crammed in with a bunch of people from our corporate division, and we do a lot of corporate communication work, team building change readiness behaviors, content plays as well. And the guys there said to me, "Do you have any ideas now that you're kind of looking to do something new that we could collaborate with other kinds of partners?" And I did. I had an idea because when you go on book tour, you notice, because you always go to the bookstore in the town you're in, and I would go and see if my book was on the shelves, and it usually was. But also there was a ton of other business books on the art of negotiation, many of which talked about improvisation, but didn't go deep. It was a very surface level. And I'm like, I think there's something deeper here. And the folks at Second City Works got excited about that. I Googled negotiation academic Chicago. First 5 professors that came up, I emailed. 4 of them got back to me right away. And about a week later, Eugene Caruso at the University of Chicago Booth School of Business got in touch with me and said, "I'm sorry I'm late getting back to you. Do you still want to talk?" And I, old Kelly would have been no, because I'm already in these other discussions, but, I'm in this new year of yes bullshit for myself. And I tool down to the University of Chicago. He invites his wife, Heather, who runs at that time the Center for Decision Research at the Booth School of Business. And she connects immediately around my talking points about improvisation, which is that it's yoga for your social skills, that it's kind of a loud, noisy group mindfulness, that it's a practice in being unpracticed, which is how we live every day. We're not handed scripts. And she ties this immediately to behavioral science and says those two things had never been put together before. And we began to sort of collaborate, and I got my wife involved, and she became our chief officer of pedagogy. And we started the Second Science Project, which looks at behavioral science through the lens of improvisation and vice versa. And so I think the best starting point, because people do generally know the concept of yes and as it comes from improvisation in Second City, and the way that that ties very neatly to behavioral science is through Heather's boss at the time, Richard Thaler, who won the Nobel Prize, author of the book Nudge. So behavioral economists show us that people's default setting is to do nothing or say no. So if you think about the improv concept of yes and, it is a nudge to actually not do that. It's a nudge to affirm and contribute, to explore and heighten, to not self-judge or self-censor your communication or that of others, the person who's across from you. So as you begin to understand all these biases, and there's literally hundreds of them that the scientific community has identified, they're all phenomena. They're all ways that human beings get in their own way. It's the way human beings make bad decisions. We're not rational actors. And improv exercises, turns out, map beautifully to that phenomenon. And so, you can learn about the behavioral economics idea of default setting of do no or do nothing. But then when you do the exercise, you embody the learning. And that is a more powerful way of learning than it is just a transfer of knowledge. So this is a program that went on for around 4 years. Heather's now moved on to UCLA, but we're working with people at Harvard and Stanford, and we're looking at restarting the lab at UCLA. So basically, Second City has now become a place where we work with a lot of different behavioral scientists to find, what is the phenomenon underneath the idea. And it's all about the way I put it is if in your business, your success requires the successful acts of human beings working with other human beings, then you could probably use our help.
So there's no doubt about it. But there are you said two things in there that I want to unpack. The notion of the default being do nothing and say no. And then the other notion of people making bad choices for themselves as sort of a default as well. And, in my, 30 some years in corporate, whether it was on the agency side or the client side, is you'd see this all the time. Really smart people doing nothing and saying no. Okay. And, I used to use two examples. One, I used to talk about Kodak and say, look, Kodak was led by very smart people. These are accomplished, well-educated, very experienced people. And yet they saw the train coming, they couldn't get off the tracks. That's right. And then I have this other thing. I used to show this visual, which I actually still use, but of 2 feet on a frozen lake. And I talk about the notion of fear paralyzes and the fear of the unknown paralyzes. So right. Why is it that people tend to default to do nothing and say no? Because that paralyzes progress.
Well, I mean, we're wired, evolutionarily speaking, to be looking out for danger. So the way this is neuroscience, right? So our brains are wired. We're still, chasing, or we're running from lions on the savannah when we're trying to catch the bus. So, it's just our brains have not evolved enough to catch up with the modern world as we know it, which is why it's vital to understand these impulses. So people then are looking like they don't want to look dumb. So that's sometimes why they don't say anything or do anything. It's also when you act, you are taking a chance in all these different kinds of ways. So you might look foolish, you might look dumb, you might be made fun of, you might feel shame, and those negative feelings are so much more powerful than our positive feelings. And this is why social media is such an issue right now, because it plays into all that stuff. It plays into every fear we've got. I mean, look, I don't know. There's very few people I know who don't feel like imposters, who don't have some level of imposter syndrome. And the people I know who don't have that are sociopaths. So, the fact is,
By the
as
way,
human
that
beings,
weirdly made me
we
feel good.
yeah, right, yeah, because I would not come on the podcast of a sociopath, because we're gonna get it wrong more than we get it right, and
Right.
that's especially for experts, more so for experts. There is so much data behind this that people sort of predicting stuff for the future, the so-called experts, they do not do as well as ordinary humans who are making sort of maybe guesses based on a bunch of different information. So this idea of approaching the world with a level of humble curiosity is something that is both supported by science and is also an element of the practice of improvisation, because we are going to make something out of nothing together. And that requires a kind of a positive emptiness when we're approaching these interactions, and an ability to basically move from what Danny Kahneman calls the system one and the system two brain. You know, the quick judgment brain that works fast in the moment, and you certainly need that for comedy. But then you also need the deliberative brain, the one that is sort of making interesting judgments on things, because that's where the good comedy comes from, that sort of deeper thing. So when I first got exposed to Kahneman's work, I'm like, this is amazing, because it's like, improvisers are constantly switching between system one and system two. So it's like it's a lot of practice in divergent thinking, which allows them to be really good in crisis situations, really good with change readiness, and really good with resilience in the face of so much uncertainty.
Right. But the, you talked a lot about feeling dumb, which I identify with passionately, and it's I'm going to call it, and I have to attribute it to you, but the Noam Chomsky syndrome. And
Yeah.
you can talk about the show you guys did way back when, but I've been in tons of meetings where, and I experienced this early on, where I'd sit in the room and go, I'm clearly don't belong here because I don't understand like 80% of what they're talking
That's right.
about. So then you try and bullshit your way through the meeting. And then somewhere along the way, early in my career, I realized that I wasn't the only one in the room. Pretty much everyone didn't understand 80% what's going on. And I thought, okay, it's okay to sort of say, I don't know. Um, and you make yourself a little vulnerable, and eventually you get used to that, and then it's okay. Um, but that's hard to do, and
It
I
is.
still see it every day where people don't know what's being said, but they can't bring themselves to say, like, sorry, I just got to ask you, what was that acronym? What did you mean? Or I'm not tracking.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, Nick Epley is one of the scholars we work with at the University of Chicago, and he does a lot of work around self-disclosure, and that individuals tend to be reluctant to share even small details of their lives because they think that the other people don't care, when the exact opposite is true. And we designed an exercise around this. When you do share even small details, people start to connect with you more deeply, and you can start to build that kind of trusting relationship that creates a good work environment. The thing that I'm sort of obsessed with lately is trying to always think in terms of teams, because we always work in groups, and sometimes that's the group, our team at work, but sometimes it's the people we're selling to, and sometimes it's other people. And so when you think in terms of teams, and this is an amazing thing I just learned, most people know about the idea around psychological safety, and this is Amy Edmondson from Harvard, but then it got sort of famously exposed by Project Aristotle at Google, which they were looking for the defining characteristics of great teams, and they came down to psychological safety, this idea that you feel comfortable sharing mistakes and that sort of thing. Apparently, unbeknownst to me, there was a couple scientists who re-looked at that and realized that in isolation, it's not psychological safety alone. It's that not only does a group have psychological safety, but it also allows for dissenting viewpoints to be heard and supported. So this idea of honoring the rebels or the dissenting, view inside that team is essential for then that team to be successful. Because if they don't have that, you get so much confirmation bias. You might feel fine because everyone's sort of in agreement and nice, but real good teams, there's constant, friction. There's constant tension because people feel very comfortable doing the thing that you just talked about that most people aren't, which is, saying no. I mean, literally, I just had this experience, and I'm not going to say what the show was that I was at, but my wife and I went to this production, and literally, I think we were the only two people in the audience who didn't like it. That people and the reviews are great, and people are jumping up and down and going crazy. And I'm like, this is like, it's fine. And everyone should be able to enjoy what they want. But I'm not going to be swayed by this group or convinced somehow just because you all liked it that I suddenly like it. But then, I mean, it's just to have the ability to say no, in those situations. You might think it's the opposite of yes and, but it isn't. It's sort of yes anding your own instincts and your comfort level and saying, I don't think so. And let me interrogate that. And then when the group is like, all right, let's interrogate that as well. I think we've all been in work teams that either do that or don't, and we know the effectiveness either way.
Right. But part of, the notion of yes and you should probably talk about it a little bit, but the notion of yes and can become a never-ending discussion in the sense of like everyone's yes and really we're not landing the plane. We just keep moving around. And I'm going to put this out there, and I know this could be risky, but I've always felt, and I've evolved as I've grown older and wiser and had the crap beat out of me, but I started off with the premise that the greatest form of business leadership is benevolent dictatorship. Okay, high on the benevolence for sure, and I think dictatorships go bad when the benevolence leaves. Mm-hmm. The analogy for me is the conductor in an orchestra, which is one of the last remaining true dictatorial positions, and out of it comes incredible beauty. And everyone has a role, and the conductor is the dictator. So, why isn't that the model? And is there some sort of reconsideration? Because at the end of the day, business is business, and decisions need to be made, and shit needs to happen, and results need to be consequential outcomes.
So two things, just a point on yes and, which is yes and is the front end of creativity. It's 5 minutes or 10 minutes at the beginning of a brainstorm. When you need to get to innovation, a lot of no's. That is about landing the plane. And here's the deal. I was just talking to Stephen R.M. Covey, the son of the other famous Stephen Covey, who talks about command and control leadership, which of course has been a staple. And then he talks about benevolent command and control, and he'd like to move that to trust and inspire leadership. And what that's about is when you establish trust with your people and they have a sense of autonomy, they're going to be inspired to perform. And I'll even link this further back, which is it's commonly understood that Peter Drucker was doing just the most cutting edge work on management theory in the 50s, Austrian born, moved to America. We have yet to adopt anything that he brought to the table. Because what he showed in his studies is that these hierarchical models, even benevolent as they are, don't ultimately work, because what you really need is knowledge workers. So in the parlance of improvisation, that ties to a concept called follow the follower, which is in these ensembles, at any given time, someone's going to take lead and then someone's going to hand off lead, like a great jazz band, like a great basketball team, you name it. You have to have everyone performing at different times in different ways for you to be successful. I like to use the sports analogies a lot because you think about this, let's say baseball, which is, are you going to stack your team with 8 home run hitters? No. And everyone else think, like, a lot of people think, oh, the best team, just get me all the, these. It's like, that's not what you need. You need a variety of skill to be successful. Some of that's at the plate, sure, but some of that's in the field, and some of that's about speed, and some of that's about psychology. We were remarking on when the Cubs won the World Series, and that last game where they had that rain delay, and Jason Hayward stepped forward and was like, guys, this is our time. And they came out a different team and they won. And it's like, Hayward was never the star we were promised, but he won us a World Series.
It's a great analogy. But the you bring up the sports analogy, and you've talked about this before, which is the power of improv is, and what defines in some way, in some part, is a great improv talent is not allowing yourself to mindfully linger inside a mistake. And I think I'm quoting you.
Mm-hmm.
And that's very similar to athletes, great athletes. Like think about the great quarterback or the great receiver who have a bad play. And the difference between one of the differences between good and great is the ability to forget the bad play.
Yeah.
It was a bad play and we're done.
Yeah, I can give you a really great recent example of this, which is I was finally ready to write the follow-up to Yes and I put together a proposal with my agent, and he was real happy with it. He sent it to HarperCollins, our publisher, because they have first right of refusal, and the person who worked on my book last time passed in an email. And I was devastated. I was just like, I can't, like, I was just sure we were both sure it was going to get picked up. We've got tons of great content. We've done so much work since Yes And so then I'm like, okay, I know how I'm feeling emotionally, and I'm feeling it in my body. And that's a whole other thing that we should talk about, is the way we get thinking wrong. We have bad metaphors for thinking. We need to understand that our body sometimes is telling our mind things before our mind is telling our body things. Anyway, so so recognizing all of that, and I'm like, all right, I'm having this reaction. How do I reframe this as an opportunity? And I saw the opening in the email from our publisher said, if Kelly wants to talk to me, I'd be more than happy to talk to him. And so I was like, I totally want to talk to you, because and her passing was, she felt it was going to be really popular with Second City fans, but maybe not a broad audience base. And I'm going for a broad audience base. So I was like, no, we're aligned. And I had this call with her on yesterday, and it was great. And by the end of the call, she's like, okay, so everything you're saying, I'm excited by as a book. So why don't you, and I'm going to co-write this with my wife, Anne, you and Anne reframe this, send me a couple pages, and we'll do this together. So it went from this like, oh, I got to do all this work and then hopefully convince her to, no, she's going to help me craft this so it's a piece that's going to work for her, for me, for Anne. And that only happened because I didn't crawl into a ball that I didn't like, oh, I'm not going to talk to her. It's like, no, like you're going to get disappointed in life over and over and over again. And this is something I think that you just learn as you get older as well.
Girl Drake would be proud of you.
Yeah. So we now I have this great opportunity that I'll take advantage of. And it's not to say, it might come at the end where it's not something she wants to, and that's fine. What I will have gotten is help in making this proposal better for the next publisher, if that's the case. But that is not old Kelly, and most people don't do that.
Right.
They just don't do it because it just hurts.
But
it hurts.
So you said you come back. I want you to come back to, because you've got me intrigued, the notion of how we get thinking wrong, and you said you feel in your body.
Yeah. So a book I've been obsessed by since I had her on the podcast was Annie Murphy Paul's The Extended Mind. And
by the way, I bought it when you mentioned it to me last time we talked. I just it's on the pile. I haven't read it.
Yeah. Oh, it's so great. And she's a science writer, and basically came to this conclusion through her beat and reading the evidence that we get thinking wrong. We have bad metaphors. We talk about the brain as computer, but a computer operates the same outdoors as it does indoors. A brain doesn't. And even the idea of growth mindset by Carol Dweck, which is work that is solid, but there is a metaphor that's a problem, which is the brain as a muscle. That somehow, if you're just athletic enough, or you're naturally smart enough, that your brain's going to work in a better way, and that's not the way we understand the brain to work. And so one of the things she brings up is how important it is to understand that the body is speaking to us before the brain. And I have an example of this. So I got a slight little heart issue. It's not a big deal, but I have a cardiologist who I see once a year. And it was last summer, He didn't like where my blood pressure was, and so he kept raising my dosage of the meds I'm on, and to the point that he tripled it. And then one day, I was about to get on Lakeshore Drive in my car. I'm driving my car, and I have an utter panic attack. And I get on and I get off at the next exit. And I'm not prone to panic attacks. I mean, I've had a couple, but this was something that was wholly different. And it really wasn't until I got home and Anne got on the computer, and she's like, the number one side effect for your drug that you're now boosted on is anxiety. And so he took me off. And I just around that time was starting to read Andy Murphy Paul's book about the body. And in talking with my therapist, I had an idea. And so the next time I was on Lakeshore Drive, and I'm back doing Lakeshore Drive, not other highways, but I'm on there, and a truck was passing me, and that's when I get sort of like nervous, and I feel it in my body. And so what I did is I smiled, and the minute I did that, everything left my body. And it was like, oh no, like my body was telling me to be scared, went to my brain, and I needed my body to tell my brain it's okay. And it's such a small thing, I know, but my therapist has given it to other people to use, and it's been effective for them. And it's like, when you understand that, what your body is telling you when something, because your body is telling you things that isn't, these are important signals. So things like shame and regret and other things that come through your body, that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just to understand what it is, what it probably means, and then how you can have some agency over the way that your body and your brain interplay.
Feels. But it's interesting because you go, I feel shame, I feel anxiety. It's feel. I don't think anxiety. I feel. But then we go to a cognitive thing as opposed to a physical body thing.
Yeah, and she has a wonderful section about gesture and the importance of that, and how people pay you more attention. Epley's work, who I talked about earlier, has a whole thing about the power of the human voice. So if you look at the most watched TED Talks, there's no charts. This is like Ken Robinson talking to you, because we respond most effectively to the human voice. And I think in the world, we're on a podcast right now, but the world of audio has blown up in ways that I think are very surprising to people, given that when you think about radio coming around, you're like, well, that's an old medium. And then we got television and we got film and all these other things. But now we're back at this sort of robust world of audio. And I think that's just because we respond to the human voice in very powerful ways. So understanding that, and then also understanding the importance of gesture, you can become a more effective presenter or communicator if you practice those things. You practice slowing your talk. You practice using your body to be effective. Sometimes that's being still. Sometimes that's, not being still. But all of that are things that live in the field that I work in and are normally used for making great comedy. And then we just never realized. Well, we realized it, but we need science to back us up now. That all these things are also just elements of being humans in the world, trying to be happy and successful.
It's funny. You reminded me of something that I'm not proud of. Long time ago, my son is now 22. Said something to me about, he made an offhand comment about you yelled at me, or when you yelled at me. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I've never raised my voice with you. And he goes, no, you didn't raise your voice. It's the way you said it.
Oh,
I mean, wow. I nearly fell off my chair when the kid said that to me. It was so insightful. And I was like, shit.
Yeah.
And it was just my
kids
voice.
See everything. Yeah. Kids see
it's
everything.
Amazing. Since we're talking family, you're not the only famous Leonard.
No.
I mean, I didn't know that. But talk about your dad. Obviously, I mean, very famous guy, Ray Leonard, long-time WGN host, legendary.
Mm-hmm.
How much of him and your mom as well, Sheila, because I know they both were in theater. How much of that impacted you and got you where you are and shaped your thinking?
Yeah. Well,
And
my
what it was
dad.
like being the son of the legend.
Yeah, my dad was a radio and TV presenter for 33 years with WGN here in Chicago. So he had a TV show, and then for a few years, but then this radio show for all that time. He reviewed theater and movies and interviewed celebrities. So I had a level of access to culture that most people probably don't. And so that's one side of the equation. I'm the youngest of six boys. And so when I went to my dad to say, "Hey, I think I want to be a playwright," because that was the thing I was writing plays and getting them produced in college, and that's what I wanted to do. My dad's words to me were "finally," because every other brother was like an architect or a journalist, a banker, and so he was very supportive of that, and helped me get some informational interviews that led to my first gig as a dishwasher at the Second City in 1988. But yeah, his influence. We had a really good relationship, and uh, I learned a bunch of things from my dad, some of which I was able to embody, like a level of curiosity. When you have a guest on and they've written a book, you have to read the book. So that's something I do. There's others that were harder for me. I'll give you an example. Shortly after I took over producing at the Second City, and this is in 1992, there were a group of people not very happy about that, mostly because I didn't hire them. And they thought they deserved to be hired here. And they produced a show called The Second City Doesn't Want Me. So it was a live theatrical review, and in which they alleged that one had to sleep with me to get hired, which was never anything. I've been married my entire time here to two different people, but married the entire time, and I didn't date anyone here. And I didn't go to it, but I heard about it, and I remember talking to my dad about it, and my dad goes, "Do you respect these people?" And I go, "No." And he goes, "Then why do you care?" I was like, wow. Yes. And I did. And I did, I'm better about that now probably than I was then, but it was very hard for me to shed my anxiety over that particular issue. And he just didn't like, he was unfazed that way. He was also, his presence on the air was pretty much the same as his presence at home. There was not, and that I'm not saying that in an unhealthy way. I'm saying that in a healthy way, where it was just like, no, he was his authentic self as much as possible, and that's a tough thing to do.
Yeah, it's funny because I was going to ask that. It's like, how different was the man that we know through radio and the man at home? Same.
No, same,
That's
same,
incredible.
same guy. I mean, like, and a wonderful at. He was a wonderful conversationalist. So one story that I love is he was interviewing the British author Martin Amis, and huge fan of Martin Amis, and I had read he had him on for a book called London Fields, and then he had a new book called The Information, and I'm reading it, and I'm like, Dad, I think you're in this book. And he's like, what are you talking about? And then he read the book, and he had Martin Amis on, and the character in the book is on a radio program, and he can't tell when the presenter is doing a commercial or talking to him. And Martin Amis goes, that was my experience when I came here. You're so good at making the commercials seem like it's just part of the conversation. I'm like, is he talking to me, or is do I need to be alert on this? I thought we were in a commercial break.
That's classic. Hey, we're getting close to time to the degree that there is time. But I wanted to finish on a tougher topic, but out of which came something that really touched me.
Mm-hmm.
And I only found out about it this morning. And we, by the way, Kelly and I talked about talking about this. So obviously, you lost Nora, your daughter.
Yeah, my daughter.
Very sad story. Or I don't want to diminish it saying story, but I read an article this morning about something that you and a friend, Mark Miller, talked about. And it blew my mind. And I was going to call you and say, I want to get involved. And when we talked before the show, you told me it came to reality. And I'd love you to talk about it because it's such a transformational idea.
Yeah.
That I think people would benefit from it.
Yeah. So we lost Nora about 2 years ago to cancer. She had just turned 17. So it was about a year. She got diagnosed and did everything we could. And And my wife and I had co-created a improv for caregivers program prior to that, so we were actually pretty good at navigating that situation. We were less prepared for the trauma and grief journey. Um, I I'm not into traditional cemeteries. They have never appealed to me. I don't get it. It didn't seem appropriate for Nora, and but I didn't know what to do. And Mark is a parent of one of Nora's classmates, and we got into conversation about what would it mean to reimagine cemeteries. And there's people out there doing this work. And our friend Heidi Stevens wrote about it in the Tribune. Um, and because we were just sort of speculating on what that could be. Could it be something in touch with nature? How could it be playful, which is the essence of Nora, like playful risky play? Um, and then Anne and I got a call from her school. Both my kids went to Chicago Waldorf, and we're just we've been there forever. And they had just moved into their new campus in Andersonville, and they had this sort of big asphalt area next to the school. And sort of unbeknownst to us, they had been starting to plan out a park. And we got to the school, and we see all these renderings, and they ask if they could name the park after Nora. So Nora's Sun and Moon Park is on Foster and Ashland in Chicago, next to the Chicago Waldorf School. We raised a couple $1 million to get it demolished, and then the first part has been built. We're still adding to that, so there's still sort of a capital campaign if anyone wants to donate. But it's a place. Thank you. It's a place where, and we haven't put her there yet. This is all sort of part of the process. But it was a way of evoking her now. And this is the thing that is really hard for parents who've lost kids, which is that balance between living your life as joyfully as you can, with as much gratitude as you can, acknowledging the terrible thing that happened, but then also, how do I make meaning out of the 17 years we had with this amazing girl? And I think that's by finding sort of thoughtful ways to express her in the present. And that might mean a walk through that park. It might mean that we visited on certain kinds of holidays. We were just talking to Mark about the sign that he's going to create, whatever piece of art is. And we talked about the idea of, do we look at the calendar, and there's one day a week where light gets reflected off a thing in the sign, so that it's like, all these like really interesting sort of playful ways that we can add to her story. Because you're so focused on the loss that it's very hard to think of anything additive. And there's nothing easy about this. But the only way you get through it is finding the integration, and then also based on our knowledge of science, which is connection with other human beings, and taking the offer of naming the park or having someone help build the sign, and all of that is the process of healing, I guess.
I can't thank you enough for being generous in letting us talk about this, because I know for a fact, and I haven't lived through this firsthand. I lost my nephew at a very young age, and I watched my sister and her husband and my other nephews suffer through it. And to have people hear about this, there are going to be people who it resonates with, and I think it's so powerful.
Well, it's
As a
a
way
fact.
to, yeah, it's a fact. And to your point, it's like, you can't change it, but it's how you manage that journey through it or with
Yeah,
it
that's right.
is so crucial. And I just touched me this morning when I read that, because I was prepared. I didn't prepare for this because I know you, and I've been following you and reading your books and listening to your stuff and all that stuff. But I thought, I should probably do a quick little, and I stumbled on that article, and it just it was incredibly thoughtful and provoking, and sort of resonated with me as it relates to my nephew Euron, who passed. not to end on a sad note, because there is some sun in that, but I think people will understand why I'm such a groupie of yours. I can't thank you enough for making the time. I'm hoping at some point I can Shanghai you back when the next book comes out. When's it coming? Do we know?
Oh no, I'm still in proposal stage, so okay. we're a couple.
It's going to be a while. All right. Well, we'll have to do something in between then. But Kelly Leonard, big mind, big heart, big person. Thank you so much, sir, for making time.
Thanks, Clive.
This podcast was brought to you by Screen Dragon. We break down barriers, make work flow, and unlock talent. Visit screendragon.com to see our software in action.